Okay, here we go. Gavin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's great to record this with you.
Gavin, as I mentioned before, I started following some of your stuff on your Instagram. There was Nick Butter who ran a marathon in every country in the world. I know you did an interview with him, which was super interesting. I started following your stuff. It's all about running with science, running smarter. Do you want to give a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so that Nick Butter, that was really kind of him. I may as well actually say a little thank you to him once we're on here. But yeah, it was really kind of him to afford me the time to do that. Who am I? So I am a sports scientist. And then after my sports science degree at John Mercer, decided to do PhD in sport and exercise cardiology. I did that in Aspetar Sports Medicine Hospital out in Qatar, Doha, so out in the Middle East near you. Did there for 4 years, and throughout that time, I always wanted to do this. I always wanted to set up and offer people, and I'm sure you get this as well, like you build up that knowledge, you build up that expertise, and you naturally want to help other people. And that led me to develop this in terms of running smarter. And that's where I came back to UK, set this up. And then right now, really, I am juggling three balls, so to speak. So I'm doing running smarter, I'm working in the NHS in cardiac science, and I'm also doing research as well at the same time. But yeah, that's in a nutshell as to who I am. So I'm a big passionate runner, fell into running, and then naturally seen the opportunity to apply science to it because it's such an endurance-based sport and you can have such a profound impact on it. And then I was like, you know what, I can help so many other people by just applying science. And you can apply big, massive positive change in that recreational runner by just applying science.
That's brilliant. And that was actually going to be one of my first questions in terms of like yourself and your running experience and things like that. And I guess it's great that you had the background in terms of your education and what you studied and jobs that you had to be able to combine that with a passion of running as well is obviously, it's kind of like the ultimate thing for a career, right?
Yeah, it's just great fun. Ultimately, like it's just once you're in this here, you're just working and running, you're talking about running. So yeah, it's just great fun. And then it's exciting as well because it's all about that process as to how can I make myself that bit of a better runner with zero talent, and then how can I help other people with perhaps maybe a bit more talent than me by just applying a bit of science. Or yeah.
So I think this is why this podcast has kind of come around. And I mentioned to you before, like I'll just go through stages of following people, and even in my own experience as well. And since we finished lockdown, early last year, I think it was April, May time in Dubai, I started doing loads more running just because, I mean, the gym started to open up a little bit more, but it just seemed like a great time to kind of get into it. And I'd always been someone who was, I've always been, fairly fit in terms of running short distances and things like that. But running a 10K was something that I'd never really done. I think I'd run 10K once. And then me and a couple of friends, just as like a social thing on a Friday morning, would meet up and we'd go and run. And we'd start off 5K, move up to 10K. And then I posted about it just then. I actually ended up doing a marathon. And that was over about 18, 19 weeks that we were building up to that. And we 15K, right, we'll try 21K, we'll try 30K and just building up. So in terms of where do people start with their running journey? Obviously, I had like a base level of fitness. Where do you find it's great for people to start if they're trying to get into running?
I think, where do you start? I think it's a great question. And that's one of the beautiful aspects about running, in that you don't need a sports club, you don't need a sports team, you don't need a running club or anything to do that. You can literally start by yourself. You could start with some mates as you did. And then that natural accountability with those mates and building things up as well. In terms of, from a broader sense as to where do you start, I think the first question, I think we can, thanks to marketing, we can create a lot of barriers here. We can think about, I need to have so many different expenditures and I need to have all X, Y, and Z. But in reality, running is accessible to all, and that's the beautiful aspect to it. And that's why we have some of the world's best in the world come from the poorest nations in the world. And with running, ultimately what we need is just a good pair of trainers to start with. And that's just something that's really comfy for you. And I think the temptation there quite often is, right, okay, I need to go and see There was the old school approach of like, look at your foot shape and then see if that matches the shoe. But we know that doesn't work, because ultimately, if you're trying to assess something on a static, you really need to look at it in a dynamic element. And then it's a case of, okay, shoe, what do I maybe need a gait analysis or something like that there. For a newbie runner, it's probably not really, it's not something that I would consider worthwhile. If someone's completely new to the sport, it's something that really, your form's going to change. There was a really actually nice study done in this where they got a group of female runners, newbie runners, got them to run at a treadmill at very different speeds, measured their run economy, so how much oxygen it costs them to do what they're trying to do, and then measured their running form from a biomechanics perspective. Didn't give them any coaching on running form or anything like that. Just got them to run for 6 weeks. And what happened was their run economy improved. So how much oxygen, and you would naturally say, oh, that's just because you're getting fitter. You're just getting physiologically fitter. But also what happened is their running form improved. And that just happened subconsciously. So part of just getting, it's just really just getting out there, getting started, building up slow, and being a bit patient with your progress, really.
I always find, I've heard multiple people say this, and it's just like a recreational athlete. It's just like, oh, I don't like running, but I wish I was just one of those people that can just run 5K or just run 10K. And like, I always took that statement as like, I'm almost like, but you can, like, you literally can go and do that. But obviously going through the kind of journey that I've been through recently, there is an element of motivation that's needed for that as well. Like, I'm not going to lie, the big one for me was actually, it was more of a social thing to begin with, going down and meeting my friends. And yeah, we would run 10K and it would take us, I don't know, an hour to begin with. Now we run like, I don't know, just over 50 minutes and we're having a conversation all the way around. It's not like, it doesn't seem like too taxing when I'm doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And having that bit of accountability with friends and stuff really does help in that there. And I guess in terms of just running 5K, just running 10K, of course, yeah, naturally it'll take a little bit of time to progress. And it's just all about building up and setting realistic goals with that, I guess, with that. And thinking about like yourself, you had a baseline fitness already there. You'd done various different sports, and that gave you that easier entry into it, I would say, in terms of building it up. It's just about thinking about your situation and building it from there, really.
Yeah, I guess this is kind of like for you to give like more of an overview of it, but why is running so good for us? Like you've kind of mentioned that it's accessible, no real barriers to it, but in terms of like physical, mental health, why is it so powerful?
Well, there was actually a really good, a systematic review of meta-analysis on this, so level 1 evidence, and they showed that just running once a week, so just once a week, was associated with reduced risk of all-cause mortality. There we go, got all the pronunciation of the words on run. Yeah. Cardiovascular mortality and cancer mortality. And that was like just by running once a week. So there's huge benefits there. And why is ultimately that the case then? That's just ultimately because you're getting that, building up that aerobic fitness. It's great from your heart function perspective because your heart's having to work that a little bit harder once we exercise, because it's having to pump this oxygenated blood. It's like any muscle. It's just like a bicep. It's like any other muscle. You train that muscle and it adapts and responds. And then that means that it's better able to cope with day-to-day activities because you're giving it a bit more of a cardiovascular stress response. It's good from that metabolic fitness perspective because you get great metabolic flux. We know a lot of people use it and it's a really effective tool for weight loss because calorifically it's really high up in that charts in comparison to other sports in terms of how much calories you expend. And then like from a mental health perspective, like it's really useful from like we've seen it in studies in depression, and we've seen like with people who are suffering from a major depression disorder, and just 30 minutes of running on a treadmill improves their mood. And I even know that from an anecdotal level, just personal level, I just naturally feel better from going for a run, especially when I'm quite stressed or I've got quite a high workload. Just getting outside, just getting that feeling of going outside. I'm sure you feel the exact same. When you go out for a run, you just feel that bit better.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I can't remember where I heard this, and it was a couple of years ago. It was maybe you've heard of this, like a psychiatrist or something like that, like the running psychiatrist or something along those lines. There was a guy whose practice, he literally, rather than having someone in to speak to him about their mental health, rather than sitting them in a room and just having, the stereotypical line on a bed and telling them about your feelings, he would go for a run with them. I can't actually remember where I heard about that, but it's a real thing. And the whole point behind that was that, you know, hormonally what's happening when you're running, you know, the endorphins that are being released, like you can have a better quality conversation because you're, you know, perhaps thinking about getting a little bit of a sweat on as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to touch upon, because like, and that's why there's like, for instance, in the UK, and it's going worldwide, there's like that run talk run movement, big movement. I think that works really well because ultimately you can just have a yarn a little bit easier once you're having it on a jog. And it definitely, from just even speaking to your mates, and I'm sure from with a psychologist, that there just breaks down the barriers that much easier, just because I think you're feeling a bit more open and relaxed. It's just removed any of those uncomfortable barriers that we get in a steel environment in a clinician room. And I think that's why it's perfect.
Yeah, nice. Just obviously, so you're working with a whole range of you know, athletes in terms of top level runners, people who are just getting into running and that type of stuff as well. Because I've heard you mention it a few times. Running with science is your thing, and I definitely want to get more into that. But before we get there, what are the common mistakes that you see people making when they get into running? Like overuse injuries sticks out like a sore thumb, right? Someone just getting into running.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's quite common in running, and that's just naturally because we have that repetitive loading with every single step, and we know, I think it's around 6 times your body weight can be rebound back upon yourself with every stride. And then I guess that's where like a lot of those great marketing techniques can come in and try and get you to buy this latest gimmick that you don't really need. It's all about just applying good science, and it's not, sometimes it can be overcomplicated. So I think this is a great opportunity just to give some simple messages out there in terms of how to do it. So then it's a case of, so we think the first one is how we build things up, and I mentioned that right at the start in terms of somebody coming in, how do you run a 5K? How do you run a 10K? And we've often heard about this 10% rule, is the increase in our weekly mileage by 10%. But there isn't a great deal of evidence with that. What there is evidence in, and is by no means a perfect model. There's no such thing as a perfect model. We'll never reduce that risk of injury to zero. Is the thing called acute to chronic workload. And that was something developed by Professor Tim Gavin. And that acute to chronic workload basically is taking into consideration what you've been doing for the last 4 weeks and then planning your next week. So chronic is what you've done over the last 4 weeks. Acute is what you plan to do next week. And you could look at that just from a distance perspective. So if you divide what you plan to do next week by what you've done over the next 4 weeks, you'll get an acute to chronic workload ratio. And you want something in there between 0.8 to 1.25. Or 1.3, sorry. And what you don't want above is really 1.5, because then you're in real danger zone where you're increasing and spiking it a little bit too much. And that would be a common mistake where I would find where maybe once I'm on an initial consultation call with a new runner and they're talking about a little niggle. If we look back at things and we reflect upon it, we see that they've just spiked things up a little bit too much, because we come into running, we're really excited, we're really eager to progress and develop. But just by applying a little simple technique like that, we can have a big impact. And then the other big aspect is, it's just, even if you think about general health recommendations, is we don't just do aerobic exercise, we complement that with strength work as well. So if we include up to 2 times per week, some strength work to focus on those key musculature as a runner, then that's going to make you more robust. That's going to make you less risk of injury. It's going to improve your run economy, and it's going to improve performance. So it's win-win in all front, really, there. And then the other big thing that's really simple and easy to apply is sleep. So just ensuring that we're getting good quality sleep. So more than 6 hours per night, and complementing that with good nutrition. That would be the key areas. We, of course, can go into detail in those each areas, but that's just a general overview as to what you want to think about.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm actually glad you brought up that strength training part as well, because that's something that I've spoken a lot about recently on these podcasts. And it's not like it's not something that we have a conversation about before we go, right, let's tell people how important strength training is. It's just a general consensus between good strength and conditioning coaches, whatever kind of sport they're doing, whether it's running, triathlons, you know, CrossFit, whatever it is, there's always going to be that element of strength training. And that goes right through to someone just trying to stay healthy as they age, right? Trying to keep that lean muscle. You know, it's going to help with it's going to have loads of benefits in the future, continuing to strength train.
That's a really nice point you touched on in terms of that as you age, because if we look at it, they're actually, the elder demographic would be considered like more at risk and more of importance to do strength training, because that's ultimately when we get weaker and we're more susceptible to little falls, little injuries, and that can set us back further, because then it takes longer to recover. We get that vicious cycle of getting weaker and then more susceptible to injury. And then that's where we get like my dad will complain, oh, my knees were stiff. I'm like, yeah, if we just do some strength work, strengthen up the muscles, that's going to help. And those knees are going to be less stiff. And that's going to really help you have a better quality of life. And that's just doing the simple things like playing with your grandkids, or whatever that might be. And I think that's a really beautiful point to touch on. So kudos.
Yeah. And just going back to obviously, injuries and overuse and stuff like that, I think you touched on this a little bit. And I guess one of the great things of exercise that we mentioned already is, or running, sorry, is, no barriers. It's easy to go and do. It's kind of easy to get started. It's exactly like you said, you get better quite quickly. Like if you just start out, you could, within a week of the first time you've gone out and the next time you go out, a week later, you could be improving, by 10 minutes on your time, and you see significant improvements, and you're not necessarily limited by any injuries or anything at that point. So naturally you want to be able, because you've got the endorphins kicking in, how good it feels. You want to go out and beat your time that you did. You want to go out and run further. So you're not actually limited by any injuries. And, I don't deal with a huge amount of people who, get into running, but obviously as like a side project to maybe some of the classes and stuff they're doing with me, they'll go and start running. And that's what I see. They plateau very, very quickly after the first 2 or 3 weeks. And it's not that they plateaued in terms of they're slowing down significantly or anything like that. It's almost always to do with feeling some injuries somewhere or feeling a bit tight somewhere.
Yeah, I guess, it's quite common, because then we're going too hard. We're pushing almost max out every time as well. And I think that's where those plateaus can happen as well, because we don't need to, how do I word it? I think that's quite a common mistake, is that once we come into running, we kind of think like that old school mentality, no pain, no gain. Every session needs to be really tough, when it really doesn't. Like, one of the great things about running is that, and it's shown in evidence, whether you're if you're running 20K a week to elite pro, that a vast majority of your sessions should be really cruise, should really be quite low heart rate work. And that's just giving you a good metabolic flux, and that's going to help give you bigger adaptations and bigger gains. And I think that's where that common mistake happens, is when we're new into it, we're just constantly trying to run PBs every week, every session. And it really shouldn't be that way. It should be a lot more relaxed and enjoy it a little bit more. Like you said there, like for instance, when you go for those 10K runs with your mates, like you're able to have a nice conversational pace now, because you build up a little bit of fitness now, and then that enables you to go into what we would call that green zone work and build up that aerobic fitness.
Yeah, I'm sure from obviously what you do on the coaching platform, you've got ways of introducing that work in heart rate zones and things like that. But I just found what worked really well for us, and don't get me wrong, all three of us, we've been training for a long time. We've got that good base level of fitness. It was more about just, we would kind of have a plan in mind, like a structure that we were going to follow all the way leading up to the marathon. Like we put a date on the marathon, right? Here's what it's going to look like. We're going to look to increase our distance and stuff over time. And it might be, 6 weeks out, and we were supposed to do maybe 25, 30K, but maybe a couple of us haven't slept very well. When, we've not had a good week. Hey, let's adjust it up. Let's just do a 10 today, steady one. And then we'll try to attack the next week instead, and just having that flexibility around the programming.
Yeah, I think that's always the beauty, because that's the beauty of having a plan. Like if you have that clear direction, that clear plan, then you can adapt it, and you can adapt it with the knowledge of this is going to be okay, because I'm adapting in accordance to that. And that's where things like recovery weeks and stuff are really good. And maybe taking those recovery weeks a little bit earlier and what have you. But having that clear plan as to how you're going to progress, how you're going to develop, then you can build it up gradually. And then you can adjust that plan to how you're feeling when perhaps you stayed up too late last night watching something really good on Netflix, and you don't have all the time in the world to get a good quality session just before work, wherever it might be.
Question: did you find that over, obviously still lockdown where you are, did you find that there was I guess from your business perspective as well, did you find there's more people wanting to get into running because of the gym closures and things like that?
Yeah, so there was a huge spike initially. And then we also seen a huge spike in overuse injuries, unfortunately, just because we went a little bit too hard on it. A lot of people, and then a lot of people come to me with the little niggles, etc. But interestingly, what really surprised me from the lockdown was when I seen the lockdown, I thought, you know what, the number one barrier we always hear when it comes to doing exercise is I don't have sufficient time to do it. And we hear it all the time, and that's why we don't do exercise. And then when lockdown appeared, I thought, right, okay, a lot of people are going to be working from home. Some people are currently furloughed. So if you're working from home, that means the commute's out of the way. And a lot of those barriers should be in theory out of the way. And I thought, right, we're going to see a big surge in physical activity levels. We're going to see a big increase. And this is going to be fantastic for our nation because that's one of the biggest burdens, lack of low physical activity levels. But in reality, what we've seen actually in the studies is actually that there's been a big drop. There's been a big drop in physical activity levels. So why is that perhaps the case? And I think the reason that is because people aren't given the right support. They're not having the right clear plan or structure as to how they're going to achieve their goal. And they don't sit down and have the clear targets. They don't have a clear plan as how they're going to do it. And if you don't have that and you're just winging it, you're going to lose motivation naturally. So what we've seen was that big initial surge, and then people just winging it for it initially. And then that motivation naturally just is going to go because we don't have that clear plan. Everyone needs a plan. With a plan, then we can sustain and keep things going.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that as well, because a lot of what I do is tracking people's exercise through their heart rate monitors and things like that, and more of as an accountability tool than anything, rather than saying someone they telling me they've worked out. I can see, as you know, through the connections and stuff that I have on the applications, I can see that they've worked out. I can see their heart rate going up and down, and it's great what you said there about everybody having a plan and needing that plan, because the plan doesn't have to be to be the absolute fittest I can be in 8 weeks, or get to the lowest percentage body fat as I can in 8 weeks. Your plan can literally be, right, for the next 12 weeks, I'm going to try and maintain and stay consistent and maybe change other areas of my life where I can make improvements.
Exactly. I think that's perfect, because that's just actually a conversation I had with a client yesterday, and they're in a really intense work period for the next 2 months. So, okay, we're going to be time pressed. So let's create a plan that's going to work to that schedule. And the plan right now is really just to maintain where we are right now. Because if we don't have a clear plan, what we'll do is we'll become overwhelmed. We'll end up doing nothing and we'll just regress. And then we're starting from scratch again in 2 months. So let's just have something that just allows us to keep things ticking over. We don't always have to be striving for progression. Sometimes it's just about having a good balance as to your current schedule right now.
I'm sure you feel this from like a coaching point of view as well. Like as a coach, there's nothing worse than when there's no direction either, because as a coach, you sometimes feel a bit not useless, but you're following up with people, and because the plan's not been agreed, you feel like you might be bugging them a little bit, or maybe they've lost motivation. Do they need me to check in, or are they okay? Like just having that plan in place is really important.
Yeah, I think it's always really difficult to strike that balance in terms of that. It's a really good point, because just trying to get the right balance in terms of that there. But I think ultimately always having some sort of direction, some sort of goal setting, like you've alluded to, whether that is I simply want to maintain my current level of fitness, or it's a case of I want to progress, is really important, because then we have both that accountability, and then it's a case of me supporting you in achieving that, and it's the exact same in your circumstances as well.
Yeah, nice. Listen, you're obviously, like I mentioned before, all the content and stuff that you're putting out, you're a real expert in this area in terms of running and the science behind it, running with science, as you mentioned before. I'll put you on the spot now. What's your, I guess it's tips that you can give to the listeners. Now this, I guess there's so many different avenues you could go down, but I'll let you decide whether it's, just a quick win for someone if they are into their running, whether it's breathing, whether it's stride pattern, running technique, I don't know, recovery. Have you got any kind of good tips that you can give to them?
Where I think I always draw things back to, because naturally with sports scientist background, where I go things back to is the Seiler's heresy of training, endurance training needs. And that's basically it's a really nice pyramid. And it ultimately, so if the listeners watching in, or those watching this on YouTube, you can see me making a little pyramid symbol right now. And you think that classic pyramid you might have seen in school, and you think about that base layer is like where the bulk of things should be, and where the good evidence is, and the very top is like the icing on the cake, so to speak. And what we know, if we think about three big things, is training frequency or volume. And there's no getting a way around it. Volume is fundamental to endurance training, any sport, whether that's swimming, cycling, triathlon, running. So having build and increase in that volume is going to be able to help you increase. The next one is HIIT training, so high intensity interval training. Now, I'm not talking about at-home workouts. I'm talking about actually HIIT training, interval training out on a track or out. It could be anywhere really. And that's VO2. I would tend to recommend VO2 max intervals there, because that'll allow you to increase that ceiling of your aerobic capacity. So in around 3 minutes, and I tend to recommend time here because I think it'll be fixing. Distance is great, but that's going to be variable on a personal level. It's going to take me different time to run 800 meters as it's going to take you as it's going to take the next person. So I think time is perfect here. So something like 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off for 6 reps. Really working in those 3 minutes, and then 2 minutes just walking. I think that's difficult for us runners because we think we have to just plod and run all the time, but that's actually going to be perfect stimulus. And then the next one is that training intensity distribution. So what we touched upon in terms of a large part of your volume should really actually be easy green zone work. And that's where that 80-20 we might have heard about. So if we think 5 sessions next week, 4 of those sessions should be cruise, and then 1 of those should be maybe an interval session. And that's shown to have the biggest improvement. It'll have the biggest improvement in that runner, and you're going to enjoy it a lot more as well, because then you're not just smashing yourself all the time. You're not feeling burnt out and fatigue. You're going to feel a lot fresher as a result. So that'd be the 3 key areas where I would really concentrate in terms of trying to progress as a runner.
Yeah, nice. And I'm trying to think of maybe like the dynamics of maybe the people listening to this, like some of the people train with me. And if someone's not, I guess kind of like me, but they're not, they're not actively trying to get better at just running, but they're using running as that kind of like general health and fitness practice that they're adding in. What kind of structure would that look like? Perhaps if they're doing a couple of strength training sessions a week, maybe they're doing like a yoga session. Are they prioritizing going for like a long run? Are they prioritizing HIIT training? I know there's so many different avenues to go down on that, because it depends on if they're doing 2 runs, 3 runs, but have you got like a general rule around that?
So I think it's a really good question. How I would tackle it depends on what those swim sessions are. If they're like HIIT training sessions, I'd maybe edge towards cruise runs for the vast majority. If they're more a nice good blend of strength training, where we maybe start with strength work, then we go down towards more endurance work in that session, I would tend to, it's all about timing and structure as to when you do it. So maybe what I would do is, for instance, so I'm naturally thinking as how I would prioritize it for a runner, but we can adjust this. Let's say if it's a runner, and then we can adjust it. So if it's a HIIT session, what I would do is have the HIIT session maybe on a Tuesday night, and then the next morning, then they'll have the strength training. So then they can really light up and they're fresh for the HIIT session before. So then I would say maybe having a bit of a blend there. So then you've got the high intensity work the day preceding the strength work, and then maybe later in the week you might have your longer run, because we do know that longer running is actually really good and really important, and that's where the really good benefits come from, because that'll build up your aerobic capacity from working in that there easy work.
We've got, obviously you know this from living in the Middle East as well, but in Dubai we have a distinct lack of hills. Everything is flat. So whenever I'm posting anything on Strava or any workouts, everyone always knows that it's completely flat, and it's kind of gets discredited.
Yeah, I certainly polar opposite to that here in Cornwall now, as you would know. It's definitely full of hills, and it's certainly a shock to the system after spending some time in the Middle East. Yeah, but that, to be fair, like that's not necessarily a bad thing running on the flat all the time. Yes, it's great to have hills, and yes, that's a bit tougher. But then if you're wanting to keep things easy, flat's pretty handy. If you want to run VO2 max intervals, flat's quite handy. Hills are great and they keep things interesting, but there's nothing wrong with flat either, in my opinion.
Yeah, nice. Gavin, that's all the questions I have for you. And like I said before, I just wanted to get someone like yourself on, and you've shared some really, really good tips there. Obviously very, very knowledgeable in what you do. Where can people find you?
So on Instagram, we can find me at running_smarter. And on there, I'll share quite a lot of tips as to like different exercises, different tips when it comes to running, and people can apply those, which are really useful. And meal suggestions as well. I quite like to cook. And then if they are interested in working with me or want to learn more or have any questions, a great way to start is getting a free Kickstart consultation, and they can schedule that at runningsmarter.co.uk. And that's a great way to get to know me, ask me some questions, and we can see if we're a good fit.
Yeah, perfect. Like I said at the start, putting out really, really good content. So make sure you go and give Gavin a follow. But thanks very much for your time, mate.
Cheers. Thank you too.